and welcome to Crime Bytes, the show where we talk about some truly bizarre and disturbing crime cases. My name is Liz, and today is True Crime Tuesday. So today we are going to head on over to sunny California, and we're going to travel back to 1985. Los Angeles in the 80s. It's August, so poor air quality is heightened by the sweltering heat. We have Hollywood and some very rich areas, but we also have some poor barrios, sometimes just a street or so away. We also have the palm trees, the big hair aerobics classes, sexy guys on their bikes, and the girls in their cars trying not to check them out. We have Schwarzenegger. It definitely would have been an interesting time and place to be alive, and for so many different reasons. So today we are in one such barrio on the poorer side of Los Angeles, and a man is approaching a local corner store. He walks a little slowly, he's kind of tired looking, browsing around, when his eyes just kind of stop and he grabs a newspaper in front of him, stares at it for a second, then he drops it and just runs out of the store. As soon as he does this, a woman next to him yells, "It's him!" And two other men looking at the same newspaper join in what has just become a chase out of the liquor store. Our first man is pretty quick, and he is already a block down the road, and he runs across I-5 dodging cars, but at this point we have a crowd of at least 5 yelling that they have already called the police. But our first man seems to be in luck and hops into the driver's seat of an unoccupied Mustang. But before he could manage to get it started, he was yanked out. But he manages to escape in his desperate frenzy, and he runs up to another car, this time with a woman in it, and he attempts to pull her out. Luckily for her, her husband was nearby and saw what the man was attempting to do, and then he grabbed a pipe and just railed him with it. Yes! But this doesn't stop him. And now with an even larger crowd pursuing him, he continues to try and flee. He manages to run outside of LA, literally just sprinting through people's backyards with an angry mob following him, sometimes catching up to him and beating him. And at one point, he was in a yard where a man comes out with his grilling utensils and just starts railing him with them. Finally, the mob was able to overpower him, and the police caught up, and they were just beating him to the point where he was just like, it's me, okay, I'm lucky the police are here, it's me. And while he is being apprehended, all the police could hear was, "Kill him, kill him." Here is a picture of what the man saw on the newspaper that started this wild chase that morning. Our young man was none other than Richard Ramerez, otherwise known as the Nightstalker, and that is how he was ultimately detained. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with Richard Ramerez, the Nightstalker, the walk-in killer, or the Valley Intruder, I'll give you a quick background. He was one of America's more prolific and brutal serial killers. He was born in El Paso, Texas on February 29th of 1960. He was the 5th child born to a mother who worked in a boot factory where she was exposed to some pretty heavy and nasty chemical fumes while she was pregnant. And all of her children had some sort of birth defects, ranging from bone abnormalities to respiratory difficulties. On top of this, Richard had 2 significant head injuries when he was very young. At age 2, he had a heavy dresser fall on his head, resulting in a fairly large laceration. And at age 5, he was knocked unconscious by a swing. And after this injury, he started experiencing epileptic seizures. On top of all of these things, his father was physically abusive to his whole family. At one point, he tied little Richard to a cross in the middle of a cemetery and just left him there overnight. When he was 12, he had an older cousin who was a veteran that started showing him pictures of Vietnamese women who he had raped and dismembered. Later on, he would go on to shoot his wife in the face in front of Richard, and Richard was only 13 when that happened. After this happened, Richard moved in with his sister and her husband, who happened to be a peeping Tom, and he would take Richard out on his expeditions with him. A few years later, Richard would end up dropping out of high school and get heavily into Satanism and cocaine. This addiction would lead him to start a string of burglaries that went hand in hand with his murders, but also helped him to support his drug habits and pay his rent. So as you can see, and I almost want to say poor Richard, I don't know if that's appropriate, but with the childhood that he had, it's almost easy to see how he became a serial killer. And I am not saying that this justifies anything that he did, quite the opposite, but he does make a great nurture factor argument in the nature versus nurture argument. I still believe that it is generally a combination of both nature and nurture, and there had to be something in his nature for him to get so bad. But he had so many factors in his early life that just set him up to fall into this. But when he did it, it seemed like he liked it, at least usually. He is also described as a sociopath, which I believe is accurate. Sociopaths display psychopathic behavior, but mostly because of how they developed or incidents that happened in their lives. Psychopaths, on the other hand, aren't capable of feeling certain emotions and are often seen as cold and hollow, whereas sociopaths have more uncontrolled and violent outbursts, a result of the emotions that they do still experience, and Ramerez definitely had plenty of these. Ultimately, Ramerez would be convicted of 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. He received 19 death sentences that were upheld by a judge who remarked that he exhibited cruelty, callousness, and viciousness beyond any human understanding. On the first day of his trial, he showed up with a pentagram on his hand, and then he made sure he had the last word while he was leaving, and that was "Hail Satan." So I got into this case while I started watching the American Horror Stories, and Ramerez is featured as a character in season 9, titled 1984. The clips I showed while describing his capture were actually from that series and are pretty spot on with what happened. They kind of incorporate him into a serial killer battle at a cursed camp, which gets really wild, but they actually do base his character off the real Richard Ramerez and the things that he did. Here is another clip from the series.
Swear on Satan. Don't waste the time. At least we'll see some blood. You're gonna be famous. You're gonna die by the hand of the Nightstalker.
Now, in real life, this scene was kind of a watered-down version of at least two of Ramirez's attacks. Ramerez didn't have one specific MO, but one of his MOs was to break into a home, and if there was a husband, he would usually kill the husband before he would assault the wife. One attack that parallels this clip was the attack on Elyas and Sakina, Abowath, and sorry if I got those names wrong. In the middle of the night, he snuck into their house and immediately shot Elyas in the head, killing him. Then he handcuffed and beat Sakina until she told him where her family's jewelry was, and then he raped her while telling her to swear on Satan that she would not scream. The worst part of this story is that during the rape, her 3-year-old son enters the room, and Ramerez just ties him up and then keeps on going. Fortunately for Sakina, though, he didn't kill her, and when he left, she was able to untie her son and send him to their neighbors to get help. The other attack that this clip parallels is the attack on Bill Carns and his fiancée Inez Erickson. This time he shot Carns 3 times in the head to make sure he died before turning on Erickson. He raped and beat her before stealing her jewelry and making her swear on Satan that there was no more. Then he told her to say that the Nightstalker was here and left. She was able to untie herself after he left and go for help. Miraculously, Carns was able to survive the 3 shots to the head. He actually does have a GoFundMe set up for medical expenses that he still faces to this day, and I will link that in the description if you are able to help and are so inclined. 2 other notably disturbing attacks were those on Leung and Anastasia Hronas. Again, sorry if I'm getting any of these names wrong. As if they weren't all completely horrible, but I am particularly affected by attacks on children, as I know many of you are as well. Leung was a 9-year-old Chinese American girl who was wandering around the city with her 8-year-old brother looking for a lost $1 bill. Ramerez had May follow him into a basement where he raped her and then stabbed her to death with his switchblade before hanging her from a pipe by her blouse. And then he left her there. This was the first murder that we know of committed by Ramerez, and he was not actually connected to it until 2009 when his DNA was matched to the DNA found at the crime scene. There was also a second assailant for this specific attack who was not identified because they were only a juvenile at the time of the attack, as well as there just not being enough evidence in general. So in February of 1985, Anastasia Hronas was sleeping in her bed when her window opened and Ramerez came in and ushered her right back out that same window. Half awake, 6-year-old Anastasia thought that he was a family member and just went out with him. Once in the car, Ramerez made her touch him and showed her a gun in his car so that she would know that he had it. He then took her back to not her house, but Slimy, and he raped her. She told him not to, but he didn't stop. She said it hurt. She asked him to stop. She said she had to pee. And when she did that, he would just hold her over a sink to pee before continuing. She had this to say about him.
Something in the way that he would look at me that it was almost like, I'm sorry that I'm doing this to you. But I'm not sorry because I'm not going to stop.
When he was done, he drove her to a gas station and told her to call the police so that her family could come get her. There didn't seem to be too much rhyme or reason for who Ramerez killed and who he kept alive, as can be seen by the 4 attacks that we just looked at. So when Ramerez went to jail, he ended up having a lot of women who were attracted to him, and one in particular wrote him quite frequently from 1985 to the point in 1988 when he proposed to her. Richard married Doreen Leung on October 3rd in 1996, and she claimed that when he was executed, she would commit suicide. It is reported that the pair divorced in 2010, and that by the time he died of B-cell lymphoma on June 7th of 2013, he was engaged to a writer who was only 23 years old. There was also a Netflix 4-part series entitled The Nightstalker that really is worth checking out if you would like a deeper dive into this case. It mainly is told from the viewpoint of the two main investigators on the case. It also goes over all of the known attacks and shares stories from his survivors and their points of view, along with images from the crime scenes. I shared a couple of them in here, but there are a whole lot more on this series. There are also a lot of cool facts that I didn't get into today, from his teeth to his shoes, that led to his capture, including a visit to the dentist where he evaded capture because the alarm bell installed specifically for when he came back to alert the police, it malfunctioned. They were able to run an actual photo when they were positive that it was him from an informant and a print that matched a Richard Ramerez that they had booked for an auto theft before his killing spree started. With that mugshot, they were able to run his name and his picture basically for the public to capture him, and what ultimately led to the chase that I described at the beginning of this video. When he was finally arrested, his arresting officer said that when he looked into his eyes, it was like looking into pure evil. He specifically stated cold black eyes and the manifestation of evil. And that is going to do it. But as always, let's try to end today on a more positive note. We're going to circle back to Anastasia Hronas, our 6-year-old survivor that we just touched on. So today, Anastasia is in her late 40s, doing well. She was always determined not to let what happened to her define her. She went on to go to school, to get married, and to have children of her own. She specifically says that she is proud that she didn't let the experience that she had with Ramerez turn her into what he was. Which says so much, because so many people use bad experiences to justify being bad people themselves. So bravo to Anastasia, and I hope more people will follow that good example. Until I see you guys again, please stay safe out there. I'll be back this channel's 1-year anniversary on Valentine's Day with a story about a terrible boyfriend. We did a terrible wife to kick off the channel last year, so we're going for a bad male lover this time, and maybe by year 3, if we're still around, we'll do a trans one. We'll do bad Valentines every year. But I've got a pretty good one picked out for you, so join me on Valentine's Day for this douchebag, and stay safe out there. Bye!